Thank you. Hope you're having a great time. And we now come to a very special part of the conference. It's the moment where we hear from our dear colleague, Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe. Nazanin's story has become sadly way too familiar to so many of you, whether you live in the UK or whether you live abroad. It's a story of injustice, failed international diplomacy, hostage-taking, and a story of a family which for 6 long years fought to be together. Back in 2016, having been in Iran to visit her family on holiday, Nazanin was separated from her young daughter, Gabriella, at Tehran International Airport. She was charged with being a spy. She was thrown into prison for crimes that she did not commit. For 6 long years, she endured more than anyone can imagine. She was denied access to her family and proper medical treatment. She was denied her liberty. She was denied justice. March 16 of this year is a day that I will never forget. I woke up with a phone call from Richard, Nazanin's husband, informing me that she was on her way to Tehran airport. I remember waiting to hear that the plane had actually left Iranian airspace. And I remember the happiness and the relief when this was finally confirmed to us. This picture brought many of us to tears, certainly myself and my team. And throughout this ordeal, I've been incredibly impressed by Nazanin's dignity and by her resilience, by Richard's determination to have his wife back. And I'm not going to lie, I also felt incredibly frustrated with the slow progress that it took to secure Nazanin's release. But she's back, she's here with us, and it's time to hear directly from her. Please welcome our colleague and friend, Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very, very much. Thank you so much. This is a very special moment for me to be here today. It took everybody a very, very long time to take me back home. I would like to thank Antonio for inviting me to speak here today. I also would like to thank my biggest TRF family to be with me and with my family all along the way. And also I would like to thank Monique Villa, who is not here today, but she has been supporting us all along the way. I'm going to read from this, just because I just want to be very precise about what I want to tell you, so I want to not forget anything. So, thank you so much. Some of you may know that my name is Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe. I was a hostage in Iran for 6 years. In April 2016, as I was coming back from Iran from a 2-week holiday with my then 22-month-old daughter, Gabriella, I was arrested, I would call it abducted, at Imam Khomeini Airport in Tehran. And I was put in prison. I spent 9 months in solitary confinement before I was transferred to the general ward in Evin Prison. In 2020, when COVID spread, I was moved out of prison on the ankle tag, and I spent the following year in my parents' home in Tehran under house arrest. And then from there on, I was at my parents' home until such time that I came back to the UK, as Antonio mentioned, on the 17th of March this year. At the time of my abduction, my daughter was very young and still breastfed. Never in a million years I thought that the Iranian government would keep a mother and her child away from each other for such a long time, but I was wrong. All the time that Iran and UK were struggling over a historic political dispute, I was kept away from my daughter. To serve that purpose, they used me as a bargaining chip and framed me to achieve their political agenda. From early days of my abduction, as early as week 2, I was told that I was detained for something very specific that the Iranian government wanted from the British government, something which evolved as my detention continued. I gradually came to a realization that I was a hostage over a dispute between the two countries. I was abducted over an old historic debt that had got nothing to do with me. All of a sudden, from a very ordinary mother and a citizen, I became a chess piece in the wider hostage policy of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards to recover funds and to stop other countries from enforcing US sanctions by taking people hostage. The judicial system in Iran is very much under the influence of the security forces, and is therefore not independent. The judge is only an implementing arm to serve the aim and the purpose of the Revolutionary Court, which is primarily run by the security forces. It was only 4 months after I was abducted that I was very quickly put into a very unfair trial. And I had no idea what I was going through, but eventually I was charged of overthrowing the Iranian regime. And I was sentenced to 5 years in prison. I was not given a chance to defend myself, nor did my lawyer at the time. And when he was asked that he could defend me in court, he was asked to write his defense. And by the time that his defense reached the court, the sentence was already ordered. Everything seemed to be previously decided in my case. The judicial process was arbitrary and done for leverage. The judicial system in Iran is utterly subservient to other agendas, and the judges get the orders from the security forces. Before I realized, I was a political pawn between the two countries, and the threat of punishment was only dangling over my head to encourage the UK government to do something. When I was in Evin, I met some really inspiring and strong women. They welcomed me warmly in their space and made me feel at home. After 9 months in solitary confinement on my own, spending time with people that I had something to talk to, all of a sudden felt like a sort of freedom. As someone who has spent years in the security and political women's ward in Evin, it's very hard to stay detached from what is happening around you. If anything, political ward will make a more warrior of you. Quite often, inmates come out of prison and they go back to prison again for something that is this time more political. And often inmates come out of prison a lot more fierce, enlightened, and aware of their rights and their abilities to fight for them. Sometimes even if they were not politically active, they will be when they come out. As we have witnessed over the past 6 weeks in Iran, protesters have been defying fierce state repression. On the 16th of September 2022, Mahsa Amini, the 22-year-old Iranian woman, died while she was in the custody of the morality police in Iran, allegedly for inappropriate clothing. The uprisings that happened following her death primarily began as a way of protesting for hijab, which still remains the core of liberation movement in Iran, but then became a movement against authoritarian regime and its oppressive rules. Even though the uprisings were predominantly led by women in early days, but very quickly we see that people from across the country in different sectors have joined the movement. And we have got university students from campuses and schools, and also recently we have seen labor movements as well, which has added a new depth to the movement. Today, the regime is not only fighting to maintain its power, but also its survival. The foundation of the Islamic Republic of Iran is based on terror. They survive in a system of repression. They have no limits in their brutality and oppression. They harass, threaten, put people in prison, and they make them force something they haven't committed. We have recently seen many political figures, celebrities, and athletes supporting the protesters in Iran who have been summoned, at times kept in custody, and sometimes banned to leave the country just because they were supporting the protesters. The security forces arrest protesters and put them in solitary confinement, which is one of the most brutal, yet less physically violent form of torture. It's a way to isolate you, to pressure you, to threaten you and break you into pieces, and then make you confess something you haven't committed. This is what we have frequently witnessed in the current protests in Tehran and in Iran. The time in solitary confinement feels eternal. Time simply doesn't pass. It loses its meaning. And there's very little you can do to fill it with. Then you start thinking about the things you have done and the things you haven't done, the things you have planned and the things you haven't planned. When in solitary, it's very, very easy to lose sanity. By isolating you, they disconnect you from the outside world. So they don't know what is happening outside world. And also, you think that people outside have forgotten you. And that is the intent of solitary confinement. They want to disconnect you from the outside world. There comes a point that you would do anything to get out of solitary. I was in solitary confinement for 248 days. I've seen many women, however, ever since I came back to the general ward, that have spent a lot longer time in solitary than myself. Niloufar, one of the 8 conservationists arrested and put in prison in Iran, was in solitary confinement for 23 months, throughout which time she has gone through 12 hours of interrogation. If you think that is unimaginable, it is true. She has been threatened to death multiple times and had gone through fear and threat of sexual assault. Any confession coming out of that has to be farce. In 2018, Iranian Revolutionary Guards detained 9 conservationists on trumped-up charges. One of the conservationists sadly died suspiciously 2 weeks after his arrest. After their unlawful arrest, the remaining 8 conservationists were treated cruelly, put in solitary confinement for prolonged periods of time, and they were denied fair trial. Niloufar is one of them. She was forced to confess, convicted of espionage charges, and sentenced to 10 years of imprisonment. Over the most recent decades, Iran has witnessed many environmental problems, including diminishing water resources, air pollution, and extinction of certain species, including cheetahs. Climate change is a political matter in Iran. And anybody who is sympathetically working on supporting the environment would be automatically classified as someone who is putting threat to national security. The despair created by the environmental problems across the nation can unite people. The mismanagement and the government's lack of response to people's basic needs causes political unrest and prompts masses to bring their demands to the streets, as we have witnessed recently in Iran. The current uprisings in Iran were primarily led by women. However, we have now witnessed a generational shift at the moment. Many of the protesters fighting their rights in the streets in Iran at the moment are younger generation. The new generation has surprised the nation and the world by refusing to back down during one of the most anti-regime demonstrations of the history of Iran. This new generation, was born in this government, and raised in this government. This is the generation of internet and social media and TikTok and satellite TV. And they, unlike my generation, who have lived through the legacy of their parents' failed revolution, they know a lot about their freedom and what the world is like. They want a more transparent government, better lifestyle, freedom of speech, and decent jobs. They want freedom as they see through the eyes of the internet. Such protests, however, are a serious threat to the Islamic Republic. It is a warning that this time they are dealing with a very different generation, a generation which knows about their rights and freedom and is willing to take their chances to get it back. They have the courage to do it, and they will do it. However, the Iranian government fears any unity or solidarity, and therefore, from the early days of this movement that we have recently seen, has done its best to shut it down. They started by shutting down internet and blocking access to the outside world, exactly as they did to the prisoners when they put them in solitary confinement. They want to conceal them away from the world. While the Iranian government is cutting off the nation's access to the global internet, it is the responsibility of the West and the world powers to take action and to ensure access to free flow of information for the Iranian people. The international community has the means to ensure that the Iranian government's efforts in surveillance and censorship is counted. It should hold the Iranian regime to account for its crime against its own humanity. The Iranian people need international support, and this is the time. Maintaining international attention is vital at this moment in history, given quite a few crises happening in the world at the moment. The international community should hold the specific individuals actively violating human rights in Iran to account through targeted sanctions. The Iranian government has learned to live through sanctions for a very, very long time. So there has to be some sort of a creativity in terms of bearing sanctions at the moment. They have a responsibility to ensure the protesters defining their rights are not forgotten. I would like to end my speech by remembering some of my friends in Evin Prison. Nilufar, Nargis, Sepide, Maryam, Zahra, and many more who have unjustly been in prison for a very, very long time. And their freedom has been taken away from them. I also would like all of us to remember that people in Iran at the moment, they are risking their lives to go to the streets and fight for their freedom, something that in the modern world people take for granted. Freedom is not easy everywhere, specifically in Iran. Today is the 40th day of the death of Mahsa Amini, and by tradition, 40th day is a day of mourning in Iran, traditionally. So I would like all of us to remember Mahsa Amini, who, sorry, it's a very, very emotional moment for me. I would like us to remember Mahsa Amini, whose death sparked rays of hope for all of us. I would say in Iran, but also across the globe, that hopefully justice will prevail. Her name is a code for freedom. And I would like to end by using the motto that Iranian women and people are using at the moment in Iran to say, women, life, freedom. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you very much.